It was raining that day. Not a heavy, dramatic storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle. The kind that soaks into your coat before you realize it and makes your shoes feel heavier than your heart already is. I remember standing on the old porch of my parents' house, the one with the cracked steps and peeling green paint. I used to jump off that porch as a child, thinking the 3 steps were a daring leap. But that day, I didn't jump. I just stood there, holding a thin folder with my name barely visible on the corner. I hadn't been inside the house in years. That house didn't feel like mine anymore, not since Mom passed, and not since Dad remarried Sandra. Sandra. Polished nails. Polite smile. Always calling me dear like she couldn't quite remember my name. She married Dad when I was already in my 30s, already out of the house, already trying to build a life of my own. Still, I came home when Dad got sick. I brought groceries. I took him to appointments. I stayed late to help with his medications, but it was Sandra who organized everything. Sandra who made the calls. Sandra who had the folder of documents and wouldn't let me touch it. And then, one Monday morning after the funeral quiet. Modest. No eulogy. Just a few scattered chairs under gray skies, we all sat down in the lawyer's office. Sandra, her 2 sons from a previous marriage, and me. The room smelled like old leather and stale coffee. The lawyer, a gentleman with thin glasses and a deep voice, cleared his throat and opened the envelope. I'm here to read the last will and testament of Mr. George Elwood. Dated April 17th. He began with the usual formalities, witness names, legal phrasing. I tried to stay calm, my hands folded in my lap, but my fingers wouldn't stop twisting themselves. And then, with a quick breath, he said it. To my loving wife, Sandra Elwood, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all assets, properties, and financial accounts. I blinked. My ears buzzed. I waited for my name. And to my children by marriage, David and Christopher. I leave equal shares of my personal effects and remaining investment portfolio. Still nothing. I leaned forward. My voice cracked when I spoke. And me. The lawyer paused. He glanced over his paperwork. There is no mention of you in this document. No mention. Not even a line. Not a book. Not a sweater. Not the old wristwatch I gave him on his 60th birthday. Sandra was quiet. She looked at me with something like sympathy, but not enough to move her hand from her handbag. Her son smirked in that half-curious, half-victorious way people do when they know a seat at the table just opened. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just stood up. I left my coat on the chair and walked out of that office into the drizzle. But I'll be honest, I felt like I was 12 again. Like the time I broke a window and Dad didn't talk to me for a week. Like I'd been bad without knowing what I'd done. I sat in my car for almost an hour before I could drive. I called my wife, Rachel, and told her I'd be home late. I didn't say why. I couldn't yet. All I kept thinking was, why was it Sandra? Was it Dad's illness clouding his mind? Or had I really done something wrong, years ago, and never realized? The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that crawls along the walls of your home. I watched Sandra begin the process of selling the house. I watched her post smiling photos with her sons by the backyard, as if none of us had history there. But just when I thought I would let it all slide, just when I thought I would tuck it under the rug like so many other things, I got a call from a woman named Harriet. She was my father's secretary for over 20 years, a quiet woman, meticulous and soft-spoken, who used to sneak me candy when I visited Dad's office in high school. I was going through some of your father's old files, she said. There's something you might want to see. When I got to her home, she handed me a small envelope. It's not legal, per se, she said, her voice a little shaky, but it's real. Inside was a letter, in my father's handwriting, dated just a few months before his last hospital stay. To my son, Michael. If anything happens to me, and if somehow you are forgotten in the process, know this: I never meant for it to be that way. I gave Sandra control of my affairs because I trusted her, but I told her what I wanted. The house was meant for you. You were supposed to have the land. You were always my son, even when I failed to show it the right way. This isn't legal, but it's the truth. There was more. He spoke about his regrets, about how proud he was of the way I raised my kids, about how he never said it out loud enough. I sat there at Harriet's kitchen table, the late afternoon light slanting in through a lace curtain, and I let the tears fall. I almost didn't fight it. I almost let it go. But something about that letter, it woke something up in me. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It was about not being erased. So I found a lawyer. I handed him the letter. I told him everything. And he listened. Carefully. Respectfully. And then he said something I didn't expect. This document changes everything. Have you ever found yourself left out? Not because you didn't belong, but because someone else decided you didn't matter. Have you ever felt erased by your own family? Please share your thoughts with me. I'd really love to hear. I didn't expect much. Honestly, when my lawyer, Mr. Stein, took the case, I thought we'd file a quiet objection, maybe stir up some paperwork, and it would get buried in the mess of probate. I assumed Sandra's lawyers would shrug us off like a fly on the wall. After all, what was a letter handwritten? No notary. No legal standing compared to a neatly prepared, witnessed will. But Mr. Stein was different. An older gentleman, gray at the temples, with steady eyes and a voice that could calm the ocean. He said to me, "Michael, a will is a legal document. Yes, but it's not the only measure of truth, especially if we can prove intent." He went digging. He pulled phone records, bank logs, old emails from my father's account. And slowly, like threads being pulled from a hidden tapestry, a pattern began to emerge. My father had, in fact, sent several emails to Sandra over the last year of his life. In them, he specifically mentioned leaving me the house. He referenced land titles and transfer documents. There were drafts rough, clumsy attempts at amending the will. And then, just like that, the communication stopped. That silence spoke volumes. Mr. Stein sat me down one day and said, "I think Sandra changed the will after your father's health declined." My throat went dry. Illegally. He raised an eyebrow. "That's what we're going to find out." We filed a formal petition to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and possible forgery of intent. Sandra was served the papers while hosting an open house for the property, trying to sell what was, by rights, my childhood home. The courtroom was nothing like I imagined. No shouting, no slamming fists, just paperwork, timelines, calm questioning. But it was the undercurrent that got to me: the way Sandra avoided eye contact, the way her son suddenly looked uneasy. Harriet agreed to testify. She brought her copy of the letter. Her voice trembled slightly on the stand, but she stood tall. George loved his son. He talked about Michael all the time. He never once mentioned leaving him out. I felt something stir in my chest when she said that. It wasn't victory. It was relief. Then came the day that changed everything. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a kind face but stern eyes, leaned forward after reviewing the new documents and said, "This letter may not be binding, but when considered alongside the emails and witness testimonies, it clearly demonstrates Mr. Elwood's intent." She turned to Sandra. "I find reasonable cause to re-examine the current will under suspicion of undue influence during the decedent's period of cognitive decline." Sandra didn't speak. She stared at the table, jaw clenched. Her lawyer asked for a recess. It was granted. But the tone of the courtroom had shifted. The tide was turning. Back home that evening, I sat in the garage, not because I had anything to fix, but because it was quiet. I opened a box of old photos, ones I hadn't looked at in years. Me on Dad's shoulders at the lake. Me helping him paint the fence. Christmas morning with my hands in wrapping paper. His smile in the background. And suddenly, I remembered something. A Sunday afternoon. I must have been 10 or 11. We were in the backyard, planting tomatoes. I asked him why he worked so hard. He just said, "So you don't have to start with nothing." That memory hit me like a wave, because here I was, in my 40s, fighting not for money, but for the right to say I wasn't nothing. The next few court sessions were slow, but steady. Evidence mounted. Sandra grew silent. Her sons withdrew from the process, quietly distancing themselves. And then, 2 months later, something unexpected happened. Sandra offered a settlement. Not just money. She offered to transfer the deed of the house, my house, back to me. Quietly. No press. No drawn-out legal fight. Mr. Stein looked at me across his desk. "We can go to trial. You'll probably win. But it'll take time, energy, and it'll leave wounds." I thought long and hard, and then I said, "I'll accept it. But I want a written statement, in court, that the will was in dispute, and that the property was returned as part of the settlement, not as a gift." He nodded. "You want it on record, I want it not to be erased." So that's how it ended. With me standing in court, watching Sandra read the agreed statement, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. She read in light of new documents and testimony, and in the interest of honoring George Elwood's original wishes. "I am transferring the family home to Michael Elwood as part of a fair and equitable settlement." And that was it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant, but it was justice. Now I sit on that same porch, the one with the cracked steps and peeling green paint. I haven't fixed it yet, but I will. The wind moves through the trees like it remembers me. The backyard looks smaller somehow, but it still feels like home. I visit Dad's grave more often now. I don't say much. Just stand there with quiet thoughts and thanks. I like to think he knows, that he's proud. Not of the fight, but of the silence I carried for so long, and the voice I finally found. Have you ever had to fight just to be remembered? Did someone once try to write you out of your own story? Tell me about it. I'll be listening. The morning after I got the keys back, I stood alone in the living room. No furniture, just echoes. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but expectant, like the house had been waiting for me to come home. The sun poured through the big window above the couch, the one Mom loved. She used to sit there with a cup of tea and a book of crossword puzzles. I swear I could almost see the imprint of her, like a faded outline on the wall. I walked from room to room, touching the doorknobs, the chipped banister, the light switches with that soft, clicking sound I remembered from childhood. Nothing had changed much, and yet everything had. Upstairs, my old bedroom was just as I had left it before college. The wallpaper had peeled at the corners. The closet still had the dent I made with a baseball bat during a teenage tantrum. I sat on the bare floor, and for a moment I wasn't a grown man anymore. I was a boy again, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be good enough. It's funny, isn't it? The ways we carry silence. My father was never the warmest man. He didn't say "I love you" easily, but he showed it in how he kept the car running on cold mornings when I had school. How he saved every report card, even the bad ones. How he gave me his old fishing rod, even though he barely fished anymore. I think he struggled with words. Like love was something that had to be proven in action, not spoken out loud. And I suppose, in the end, that's what this house was. Not just a gift, a memory, a redemption. I spent weeks restoring it, not to sell it, not to rent it out, but to live in it again. I started with the porch steps. Each nail I hammered in felt like a small apology to the boy I used to be forgotten, left out, but still here. I painted the siding back to its original green. I called the same local carpenter who'd worked on the roof years ago. We laughed over how little had changed in this town. Neighbors started waving again. Some even stopped by. Mrs. Whitmore brought over a pie. I remember you playing out front with that yellow dog of yours. What was his name? Buddy. I smiled. He's been gone a long time. She patted my shoulder. Some houses just feel better when the right person's in them again. That night, I sat in the living room with Rachel and the kids. We ordered pizza and ate it cross-legged on the floor. No furniture yet, just laughter and old echoes mingling like old friends. My daughter asked, "Daddy, did you live here when you were a little boy?" I nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. I did." "Did Grandpa live here too?" I looked around the room at the worn corners, the steady beams, the place where the clock used to tick above the mantel. "Yes," I said. "He did. And somehow, he still does." But not everything was easy. There were hard moments. Like when I found the storage box with Dad's handwriting, marked "Keep Important." Inside were old bills, receipts, a stack of birthday cards I'd sent him over the years. Everyone saved. There was a newspaper clipping of my college graduation, a copy of my wedding invitation, and at the bottom was the first draft of the will. My name was there, clear as day, to my son Michael. I leave the house and surrounding property. It has always been his. The date was 6 months before the final version was signed. My hands trembled as I held it. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Not anger, just grief. Grief that this version hadn't been the one notarized. Grief that he hadn't fought harder for me when Sandra stepped in. Or maybe he tried, and I never knew. I cried that night. Not because I'd been left out of a will, but because I realized how many small ways we can disappear in our own families without anyone even saying the words. But slowly, something began to change in me. It wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about reclaiming myself. I started taking long walks through the backyard every morning, just like Dad used to. I planted tomatoes in the same patch of soil where he and I worked side by side all those years ago. I even hung his old wind chime back on the porch, the one that sings in the slightest breeze. Sometimes I talk to him, not out loud, just in my head. I tell him about the day, about the kids, about the porch swing I plan to install next spring, and even though I never hear anything back, I feel answered. He may not have known how to say the words, but in his own way, he tried. And that letter folded, hidden, nearly lost was his last attempt to say, "You were always mine." One afternoon, Sandra stopped by, unannounced. She stood at the gate, hesitant, dressed in beige, a little thinner than before. I opened the screen door but didn't step out. "I just wanted to see the house one last time," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Then I nodded. "You can look, but not long." She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the porch, the trees, the paint. "I didn't know he wrote that letter," she whispered. "If I had, maybe things would have been different." I didn't correct her. I just said, "He trusted you." I didn't. She looked down, then back up at me. "You always reminded him of your mother. That scared him, I think. The softness." I nodded. "Funny. That's the part I'm learning to be proud of." And with that, she left. Quietly. Like she'd never really belonged there to begin with. Have you ever stood in a place that once broke your heart and found it healing you instead? Or been surprised by the strength you didn't know you still had? If you have, I'd love to hear your story. I never thought I'd be someone who took joy in sanding wood. But there I was, every weekend, in the garage with sawdust in my hair and calluses forming again on hands that had spent years behind a keyboard. I started with a small bench for the porch, then a shelf for the kitchen, then a swing set for my grandkids. Funny how healing doesn't always come with music or tears. Sometimes, it's just the rhythm of your breath, the feel of grain under your fingers, the sound of something broken becoming whole again. A few months after I reclaimed the house, I got a call from the local historical society. They'd heard the story. Small towns spread news like wildfire through dry grass. A neighbor had told them how the house had returned to the real Elwood, as they called it. A kind woman named Deborah invited me to speak at a town gathering. Nothing grand, just a community night honoring old homes and the families that built them. I almost said no. What would I even say, that I had been disinherited by my own father, only to find out he hadn't really meant it, that I fought my stepmother in court just to prove I mattered. It felt messy, private, not something you share over punch and cookies. But Rachel gently said, "Maybe someone else needs to hear it. Maybe it's not just your story." So I went. The event was held in the library basement. Rows of folding chairs, a slideshow projector clicking between images of barns and brick homes. I sat near the back, heart thudding like I was back in high school waiting to give a book report. When they called my name, I stood up with shaking legs, walked to the front. The mic squeaked. I took a deep breath and told the truth. I didn't make it sound prettier than it was. I told them how it hurt, how confusing it was to feel erased, how angry I was when I first found out, but also how deeply comforting it had been to find that letter, to know my father hadn't meant to leave me behind, that even in silence, he still saw me. I ended with this: we don't always get the apology we want. Sometimes we get a memory, a letter, a home, and that has to be enough. There was silence for a beat, and then people clapped. Not loud or showy, just that kind of warm, steady applause that says, "We understand." Afterward, a man in his 70s came up to me. He had watery eyes and a faded baseball cap. My brother did the same to me. He said, after Mom passed, he took the land, said I wasn't really around enough to deserve it, but I took care of her every weekend for 3 years, just didn't talk about it much. I nodded. Sometimes, the ones who stay silent get forgotten. He looked at me, voice shaking, and said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Since then, I've tried to be more open about my past, not to relive the pain but to help others make sense of their own. I've had letters sent to me from strangers who saw a clip of the speech someone posted online. One from a woman who hadn't spoken to her sister in 10 years because of a family inheritance fight. Another from a man whose father had remarried and left everything to his new wife's kids. One letter ended with, "I thought I was the only one, but now I know I'm not." And that changes something. That's the thing no one tells you about being left out of a will. It's not just about money or property. It's about identity, about being told, in legal ink, that you didn't count, that your years of birthdays, visits, calls, and care didn't matter enough. And it takes time, real time, to undo the ache of that. But healing doesn't have to come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it's in repainting the window frames. Sometimes, it's in writing a note to your own kids, saying everything you wish your father had said to you. Sometimes, it's just in waking up each day in a house that remembers your name. This spring, I planted a tree in the backyard, an oak. I chose it because they grow slowly, because they take their time to become strong, just like I had to. The kids helped me dig the hole. My grandson asked, Will it be here when I'm a grown-up? I looked at the sapling, barely taller than his shoulder. Yes, I said. It'll be here. Stronger than ever. And I realized, maybe that's the legacy I want to leave. Not just a house, but a place that held pain and turned it into something living. Have you ever had to build your own version of home? Not just a place to sleep, but a place that sees you, holds you, remembers you. I hope you'll share your story. I'm still listening. It wasn't long after the tree planting that I stumbled across the last piece of my father's handwriting. I was clearing out the small attic above the garage, hot, dusty, full of spider webs and long-forgotten boxes. Some were filled with bills, others with my childhood toys. And then, near the back, was an old briefcase I didn't recognize. It had his initials engraved on the latch. G.E. The metal was rusted, but it clicked open easily. Inside yellowed papers, an old pipe, and one torn legal pad. On it, in my father's careful, slanted handwriting, were notes. Not work notes, not lists, but thoughts. Michael is quiet, like his mother. I don't always understand him, but he's loyal in ways I never deserved. Told Sandra I want the house to go to him. She didn't seem thrilled. Said he has his own life. Maybe she doesn't see what I see. I wish I'd said it more. I'm proud of him. I sat down right there on the attic floor and cried. Not with loud sobs, just the kind of quiet, chest-deep shaking that feels like a dam giving way. Because no judge could have seen this. No court ruling. No official document could ever touch the truth hidden in that one forgotten notebook. That he saw me, even if he didn't know how to show it. I never told Sandra about the notebook. Some things, I believe, are just for the soul that was hurt. This was mine. I kept the page with the line about loyalty. I framed it. It hangs in my study now, right above my desk, where the sun catches the ink around 4 p.m. every day. And some days, when I start to doubt my worth, when the echo of that day in the lawyer's office tries to creep back, I look up, and I read it again. Loyal in ways I never deserved. That's the kind of man I've always tried to be. I also started writing letters to my own children. Not emails, not texts. Real, handwritten letters. One for each birthday, one for each time they surprised me, one for the little moments they probably didn't think I noticed, like when my son helped his sister with homework without being asked, or when my daughter shared her favorite book with her cousin. I keep them in a box marked to be opened someday, because I want them to know, without question, where they stand with me. I want no silence between us, not even after I'm gone. You see, this whole experience taught me something I didn't expect. It's not just about the will we leave behind. It's about the willingness to love out loud, to name our pride, to document our care, to say it before it becomes something people have to go looking for in dusty attics. And most of all, to make sure our family knows, while we're still here, that they belong. A few weeks ago, Rachel and I hosted a dinner. Just a simple one: grilled chicken, corn on the cob, lemonade. The kids came with their partners. The grandkids chased fireflies in the yard while we sat on the porch. At one point, as the sky turned that deep summer purple, my son asked me, "Dad, do you ever regret going through all of it? The fight, the court, the pain." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the yard, the oak tree, the soft yellow glow in the windows of the house that almost wasn't mine. Then I said, "No, because now I know where I stand." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "And now so do we." There are still moments when the past sneaks up on me. Sometimes I'll see Sandra's sons on the street. We nod, politely, like strangers. There's no hostility, just a distance neither of us will ever cross. Other times, I'll see families in court reports, going through the same battles I did over land, inheritance, intent. I ache for them, because I know the toll it takes. I know how deep the pain of being unacknowledged can go, and I wish I could tell each of them, even if you don't win the case, you can still reclaim yourself. You see, the judge gave me the house, but I gave myself back my dignity, not with a ruling, but with the quiet choice to stay, to rebuild, to speak, to feel. And maybe that's what matters most in the end. Not who writes your name in ink, but whether you're willing to carve it into the story with your own hands. Have you ever had to reclaim something that was taken from you, not because of law, but because of love? I'd be honored if you'd share your journey below. It's been 5 years since I walked back into this house for the first time. 5 years since I sat in that lawyer's office and heard the words, "There is no mention of you in this document." I can still hear them sometimes. In the shower, while trimming hedges. That quiet echo of being forgotten. But now, it doesn't hurt. Not like it did. Because since then, I've built something stronger than what was taken from me. I built peace. A few months ago, I was sitting on the porch, my favorite chair, mug of black coffee, early morning breeze nudging the chimes when I got a letter in the mail. It was from Christopher, Sandra's younger son. I didn't expect much. We hadn't spoken since the court settlement. I barely remembered the sound of his voice, only the way he'd looked away in court, shifting in his seat when the judge mentioned Dad's emails. I opened the envelope slowly. It read, "Michael, I don't know if this will matter now, but I want to apologize. Back then, I didn't understand. I thought it was just money, just property. But now that I'm older, with a son of my own, I get it. You weren't fighting for things. You were fighting for memory, for your name. I'm sorry I didn't stand with you when you were doing that. I hope, someday, you'll forgive me. Chris." I read it twice, then a third time, and I just sat there, in the porch light, letting the words settle like dust on old floorboards. I haven't written back yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But what struck me most wasn't the apology. It was the fact that he finally understood. That the silence that once wrapped around my name like a shroud had cracked open, and something living had come out. There's one last thing I want to tell you. A few weeks ago, I sat down with a lawyer not to dispute anything, but to prepare my own will. I took my time. I didn't rush it. I didn't delegate it. I wrote it myself. Every line. Not because I have much to give just this house, a few savings, and some land, but because I want there to be no confusion. Every name in that will matters. Every letter was written in full, and at the very top of the page, in bold, "This document is not about money, it's about memory." I included a letter too, not tucked in secret like Dad's, but placed with intention. Signed, dated, sealed. A letter that says, "If you are reading this, then I am gone. But I want you to know none of this was ever about things. It was always about roots, about not letting someone else decide where you belonged. I hope this house holds you. I hope the land steadies you. And I hope you never forget that you were never once invisible to me." That's how I want to leave this world. Not perfectly, but clearly. With no son or daughter sitting on a porch wondering why they weren't named. With no attic filled with forgotten truth. With nothing left unsaid. The judge gave me back my name. The house gave me back my roots. But it was the fight, the quiet, exhausting, deeply human fight that gave me back myself. So wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been left out, if you've ever been the one who wasn't mentioned, if you've ever had to rebuild a home out of the ruins of someone else's decision, then know this: you are not alone. You are not invisible. And your story matters. More than any document. More than any courtroom. More than any silence. Have you ever found strength in something that was meant to break you? If this story spoke to something inside you, even just a little, I hope you'll write your own version of it, down in the comments, or just for yourself. Because we all deserve to be remembered, even if we have to be the ones to write it.